Okay, so our April story time. We've got a nice picnic in the countryside theme going on. Lots of good hats and thermoses and things. So.
Also, I'm just really impressed by the way that Anne and Barry like have a strong color theme going on in everything in this matches.
Everything is it looks like you've got
a really consistent color palette.
Gone out with your cushions and your blanket that are beige, and they go with your hats, and you've got your coats on. And,
I'll just tilt this down.
The very Midsummer Murders fancy picnic.
Great.
But I have here my tea, but I have my thermos, and then I'm pouring it into my fancy cup.
Very nice. Excellent.
And
well, I would have
here are my scones.
Mum has her thermos.
And I'm pouring it into my awesome cup.
Oh, very nice.
Wonderful.
Well, I would have got my enamel mug, but I left my enamel mug in Mum's car this morning.
And our themes were interactions between different kinds of service dogs, road signs for minor or unusual tourist attractions. When you see a sign for a place with your name in it. When the tourist attraction in your town is not as big or impressive compared with your visiting friends. What the tour guide chooses to show you on the tour and whether they're any good at being a tour guide. When you get invited to join something that's really out of your comfort zone. When the club is not what it says on the tin. When your stuff is packed and you have to make do with what you haven't packed yet. I put in a couple off of the wait list, which were a spanner in the works and unusual or distinctive toilets and mechanical entry systems. So like at some point we had the discussion about how our building has a mechanical entry system and it tells you when the door is open. So every time someone comes in, sometimes we can hear it up here, including when we're trying to record music or whatever, you can hear the door is open come from downstairs if you've got the window open. So some time ago we'd said we'll try and put that in as a topic, and it's been on the wait list for ages, and I just kind of saw an opportunity to squeeze it in. So tying in beautifully with our country picnic themed story, today's House and Words topic is at the picnic. So I've written the poem At the Picnic, which will also be my poem for today.
Perfect.
Over the valley, the crickets hum. The wind whispers shifting songs, and the voices of walkers ring out like bells on the soft breeze, bouncing with brightness from the walls of rock. You could be lost here, sandwich laden and tea soaked, time turning to honey rivers and ebbing away into the ancient stone. And today's story is called Spanner Avoiding Work. I'm not a dog person, Kasey remarked to her cat, Lolly. But that guy with all the Labradors looks lost and very sweet. She watched out of the window as the man wandering up the country road paused to disentangle the leashes of 4 young canines who had failed to agree on which direction they wanted to move in, and peered at his phone, almost certainly checking a Google map. If I go and talk to him, Kasey began, eyeing Lolly, who sat squinting on the windowsill, you won't shun me when I come back, will you? Lolly blinked and twitched her sunlit whiskers, looking back at Kasey with a disinterested stare that clearly said, no promises. Kasey thumbed her latest floral arrangement pensively, and flecks of wheat husk and lavender bud dropped to the windowsill to be swished up in Lolly's tail. I'm going to see if I can help him, Kasey told Lolly. I promise I won't be won over by any dogs. Lolly twitched her ears in annoyance and turned to look out of the window. Kasey went out of her front door, and slid on a pair of galoshes that sat on her porch to protect her feet from the prickly dirt driveway as she made her way to the gate. "Hi," she called, leaning on her fence. The man with many dogs attempted to turn around whilst being pulled in 4 directions. Hello," he called over his shoulder. He seemed like a novice to being in the countryside, slightly perturbed by a stranger greeting him over their fence. His rather unruly brown curls were, much like his dogs, flying in multiple directions in the dry summer wind. Kasey thought he looked a bit hopeless, and that this made him very cute. And therefore, despite not being a dog person, she decided to engage him in conversation over the one thing she could guarantee he wanted to talk about. "Nice dogs," she commented. "Thanks," the man replied, tripping over one of the leashes, passing it to the other hand, and finally succeeding in turning fully in Kasey's direction. "They're guide dogs in training, actually. Although they're definitely not showing it this afternoon, are you?" He looked down at them. "Especially you, Spanner." Spanner was busy trying to be leader of the pack. He felt that the role was best attained by being something of a clown, and was currently playing a game where he wound around and bumped into the other dogs on purpose, both to get their attention and to further entrap the human, who evidently still thought he was supposed to be in charge. The female human who'd come out to call over the fence was not a desirable addition to the pack. She had an organised, authoritative scent, and a tone that indicated she sought to influence their hitherto rather aimless human to some new purpose. Spanner made a sudden lunge in attempt to trip his human, Jamie, into the bushes at the side of the road. If embarrassed in front of her, Jamie would presumably not want to see this other human again. Humans seem to remember such events for far longer than dogs did and care about them far more. When Jamie did not fall into the bushes, Spanner reverted to a plan B of smirking and making rude, tongue-lolling faces at the woman. The female's posture suggested that she did not especially like the canine members of the pack and would be sensitive to their ridicule. Spanner's friends, Sonny, Seb, and Sandy, turned to look at the human along with Spanner, and they all began to grin and snicker. Kasey had an uncomfortable sense that this young man's dogs were laughing at her. She shook her head. That was silly. Dogs didn't make fun of humans. It was cats that sometimes had the impression that they were in charge. Behind Kasey, in the window, Lolly bristled with annoyance and turned her back to the scene outside. Are you trying to find something?" Kasey asked the man, avoiding the mocking gaze of 4 sets of amused canine eyes. "You looked a bit lost. The roads in this town are a bit unusually laid out. I was lost all the time when I first arrived." The man made his way closer to Kasey's front fence in a slow zigzag, punctuated by sharp utterances that Kasey assumed were the dogs' names. "Well, we're just passing through, really," he told her, when he'd finally manoeuvred close enough to speak at a normal volume. "We're heading to a place called Trottsam. Do you know it?" Kasey thought for a moment. Off the top of her head, she couldn't bring such a place to mind. But she wanted to keep talking to the man, so she replied, "Oh, I might have passed through there on my way to moving here. What's in Trottsam for you to visit?" The man gave a little shrug, wrapping the dog leashes around his fingers. "The Down," he told her. And then, seeing her perplexed expression, "The Dog Obedience Working Nebula. I think whoever named it was a bit determined about the acronym being a command." Kasey snorted and shook her head. "Are these for doing an obedience display?" she asked with a grin. "We're attending some workshops," the man supplied with a chuckle. "Anyway, we just stopped for some lunch, but I seem to be orbiting the center of town without finding it." He pointed at the marker on his phone map. "Ah," Kasey laughed. That's because you don't know about the no-through walkway. I'll show you. I'll just get my keys. She ducked back in the front door, and Lolly gave her a long stare as she grabbed her bag from the hat stand. Oh, I know. Shut up, Kasey told her, slinging her bag over her shoulder and ducking back outside. One of the Labradors was peeing on her gatepost, and the man was looking apologetic. I'm Kasey, by the way, Kasey supplied, closing the gate and pointedly ignoring the dog's attempt to claim it as his territory. Jamie, answered the man, trying to offer his hand to shake and falling over one of the other dogs. So, Jamie, Kasey pressed on, determined not to be put off, do you like pies? Because there'll be a market today, and we have a baker here who's rather niche. Pies are basically all he does. Spanner put his face down on Kasey's foot, eyes wide and innocent, and slobbered all over her shoe. Despite a valiant effort by the whole pack, none of Spanner's diversion tactics were effective in discouraging Jamie from spending several hours eating pie, drinking that terrible bitter hot water humans liked, and talking to Kasey. The 4 dogs lay under outdoor cafe tables and tripped up market-going locals, which earned them 1 dropped muffin and a lot of embarrassed apologies from Jamie. Before they'd finished laughing at a princess-like poodle with a new hairdo, or conning the nice old man sitting on a nearby bench out of the rest of his Metwurst and cheese, the hounds found themselves being towed back to Kasey's house, where they were taken through a side gate and put in the field out the back. It smelt of cat and was occupied by a flock of sulphur-crested cockatoos, and under these circumstances, Spanner felt that they could not have been blamed for getting distracted. The humans went inside, and Spanner, Sunny, Seb and Sandy chased cockatoos, sniffed trees, and missed a crucial moment. I don't suppose you fancy a road trip, Jamie was saying, rocking back on one of Kasey's dining room chairs. Kasey looked at Lolly, who glared. Well, I do have a few extra days off work after the long weekend. I guess my plans mostly consisted of drinking tea, going for runs and stealing bits of plants, all of which I could do on the road to and from Trottsam. Kasey tried to pick Lolly up, and Lolly wriggled away and went under an armchair, staring suspiciously at the dog leads looped over Jamie's backpack. I do have to warn you, though, I'm not really a dog person. I'd just be coming to see the sights and have a change of scenery. Jamie shrugged as if to say he didn't mind. Kasey packed a bag with all her essentials, and then had to clean her teeth with one of those mini brushes they give you on aeroplanes and wear her bathers, because she couldn't be bothered unpacking again to get her toothbrush and preferred underwear. Then she went next door to ask Joan to look after Lolly and tell her not to leave any scones on the porch tomorrow, because Joan did that sort of thing otherwise. She also said that she would text her to say where they were, because it was probably a bit crazy to set out on a road trip with someone she'd just met and his 4 dogs, but Kasey had never been the type to refuse a spontaneous invitation. After half an hour in the car, during which all 4 dogs howled along to Jamie's music and made conversation impossible, Jamie grinned at the rear-view mirror, waved, and pulled over to get out and greet the driver behind. 2 retrievers, one black and one golden, wearing little red vests, jumped out of the car after a woman with extremely voluminous dark curls. Spanner, Sunny, Seb and Sandy bundled over Jamie's back seat, into the front seat, over Kasey, and out to greet the other dogs. Don't mind me, Kasey muttered. Totally fine with being stepped on here. Jamie, however, was not in the car to be apologetic, as he'd gone over to hug the woman from the other vehicle. Hey, Francesca! Hi, Crumbles! Hi, Soot! He knelt down and the dogs licked him on the nose and eyelids and danced about. Then one of them trotted a short distance away, turned around 3 times, and pooped right on top of a yucca plant. Greetings complete, Francesca and her 2 retrievers tailed Jamie, Kasey, and Jamie's 4 dogs as they got back on the road. Kasey felt rather disgruntled. She hadn't realised that Jamie would be picking up other friends, canine or human, along the way. She brightened, however, upon seeing a sign for Kasey's Lookout. This had to be a special spot, perfect for an afternoon tea picnic, right? Kasey pointed out the sign to Jamie, who flashed his lights at Francesca and turned up the road the sign indicated. There were a few more turns and a section of dirt track, and then the cars crested a hill into an area where someone had marked out car parks with a few stones and installed a parking meter. Really? Snorted Kasey. There were no other cars at the lookout, and the reason for this was soon evident as they got out of their vehicles and approached the open area at the top of the path to find that the lookout consisted of a cliff. A sign attached to a boulder featured a few species of bird, which it said inhabited the valley below, but none were present in the visual range, probably thanks to the dogs, who were enthusiastically sniffing up and down the cleared area at the top of the cliff, less concerned than the humans were with the lack of a barrier of any kind to keep them from toppling into the trees. The view from the lookout was reasonably nice, and presumably even nicer if you could bring yourself to stand near the edge. But Kasey certainly didn't think it warranted paid parking. Nonetheless, they sat on the single bench seat, looked out at the scrub, and passed a thermos of tea and a block of chocolate back and forth, while the dogs pretended to be fiercer than they were and howled from the precipice like their hunting ancestors. Spanner was just trying to organise a proper chorus when the humans started packing their drinks back into their bags. Annoyed that they had failed to comprehend how perfect this place was, Spanner found a nice stout-shaped stick, took it to Kasey and dropped it at her feet. Either she would stop to play with him, delaying their departure, or she would trip over the stick and fall down, which would have the same effect, he reasoned. Kasey, however, was clearly an even more troublesome human than he'd thought, as she did neither, simply stepping over the stick and saying, "Sorry, mate, not a dog person." Spanner glanced at his comrades in horror, conveying instantly with his shocked gaze the message, "This human must be trained." Back on the road and resolved to avoid distractions, the occupants of the 2 cars cranked up the power on their air conditioners, regretted drinking hot tea, and tried to take the most direct route possible to Trottsam to ensure they would arrive before the local pub stopped serving dinner. They hurried through a long stretch of scrub with the sign, "Correctional Facility Area, do not pick up hitchhikers." Refrained from detouring up a road with a sign proclaiming it housed a spider farm, and were on track to ignore an attraction labelled only as Big Lizzie when Francesca flashed her emergency lights and pulled over, popping her car's bonnet open. "Overheating," she reported to Jamie and Kasey when they pulled up behind her. "Just going to top up the coolant." She ran around the back of the car and let the retrievers out of the boot so that she could open a compartment housing tools, oil and coolant bottles, and some sunblock and toilet paper. Seasoned road tripper, Kasey thought, her respect for Francesca rising. Jamie was frowning at one of those yellow warning signs that normally notify drivers of animals crossing or dangerous conditions caused by weather. "What do you think that's supposed to be?" he asked, pointing at the image. Kasey approached the sign, peering closer. "It looks as though it's saying that stuff might fall from up there." She pointed at the tall cliff to their left. "But what are those falling bits meant to be? They're not rocks, are they?" Jamie shook his head. "That one kind of looks like a hammer." They all looked up at the cliff in confusion, Francesca pausing in her pouring of coolant. There seemed to be some kind of building at the top of the cliff, and Kasey could make out some people moving about in high-vis vests. I think it's genuinely warning of the possibility of falling tools, she exclaimed. As if on cue, something came over the edge, twisting and tumbling in the air as it hurtled downward. Look out, shouted Jamie and someone from above in unison. The humans and canines on the lower road scattered, and whatever it was that had been dropped fell with a heavy clatter into the open bonnet of Francesca's vehicle.
There we go.
I'm pretty sure we've literally just got a spanner in the works, Jamie spluttered. Francesca peered tentatively into her car's inner workings. I think I should probably call the RAA, just to check it hasn't broken anything in there, she said. Agreed, replied Jamie. Well, I know we said we weren't doing any more stops, but is anyone else really curious to see who or what Big Lizzie is? Kasey had to admit that she was, and all the dogs seemed very keen to stay out of the car. So while Francesca waited for the RAA in the shade of a tree, well away from the falling tools sign, all 5 dogs accompanied Jamie and Kasey up the rough dirt side road, following the signs to whatever Big Lizzie was. Just when they were beginning to think that perhaps Big Lizzie was just a very large tree or unusually shaped rock that they'd failed to notice, an opening in the fence line appeared, topped with a large sign reading Red Cliffs Historical Society, Big Lizzie Monument. Big Lizzie, it emerged, was a very large tractor. Kasey was just reading the sign that explained the machine's slow but sturdy progress and a central role in clearing the land for early European settlers allowed, when a young man with very flat blonde hair and a bored expression wandered over. Want a tour? He droned, looking at them like they were a dreadful nuisance. We're fine looking on our own, Jamie told him, glancing nervously down at the 5 dogs that were currently sitting at his feet. Well, this here's Big Lizzie, said the chap, ignoring Jamie's answer. She's a traction engine, and she's really slow, but chops up stuff well, which was good in olden times. How old is Big Lizzie exactly? Asked Kasey. The guide glanced down at the plaque. Well, she was used by some of the earliest settlers in the area. He pointed at a part of the wheel. And this wheel actually chops up stuff that it rolls over, so it's quite good. There's a lot of sticks in that. He strode off suddenly, and Jamie and Kasey looked at one another, unsure whether the guide had run out of things to say or wanted them to hurry after him. Over here, he called back at them, answering the unspoken question. They followed the man to a shed structure a short distance away. In here is where they used to do maintenance on Big Lizzie, and where those bricks are, he indicated a pile of stones, used to be the long drop dunny, so don't step there because there's still a hole and you might fall down. Kasey frowned at the shed. This shed is smaller than the tractor. The man looked at her as though she was thick. What do you mean? Well, look, Big Lizzie is at least a couple of meters taller than this shed, Kasey said, pointing from one to the other. So how did they do maintenance on the tractor in here if the tractor doesn't fit inside? The guide combed his flat blonde hair even flatter with his fingertips. Yeah, no, well, they'd take her apart in that. Right. Kasey looked at Jamie with widened eyes. And does Big Lizzie still drive? The blonde man patted the side of the shed. Sometimes. He took a couple of steps back. Just a minute. He trowed off and walked behind the shed. After a few moments, he appeared on the other side, and Kasey and Jamie saw him walk quickly back to the small gift shop building that stood near the gate. They waited a few minutes to be sure, but it was soon evident that he was not coming back. Good tour, remarked Kasey, and Jamie snorted. Then he looked up. Oh no, Spanner, Sandy. He trotted hurriedly back towards Big Lizzie. Spanner wondered if the humans really knew what excellent sites they'd selected to stop at today. First, that fantastic trip back in time to how their ancestors must have felt on the hunt, and now this perfect graffiti wall, wide and metallic and ready to bear the mark of every visitor for years to come. The pack of 5 jostled for position to separate their scents. Then a man in old trousers that smelt like sheep and machine oil and old bits of paper came out of a nearby building and growled at Jamie, and everyone was pulled away and led towards the gate. They all enjoyed a refreshing race back to the car, after which the humans smelt excellent. A hot drive in the late afternoon sun later, the sign for Trottsam appeared on the horizon. Information markers declared what were obviously considered the little town's essentials: tractor museum, doctor, brewery, hotel. The town was like a green square on a patchwork quilt, and a quaint piece of what looked like the English countryside transplanted into the dry Australian plains. Geez, remarked Kasey, where are they getting the water from? Thick hedges bounded the streets, and a lush town green with bunting announcing the Dog Obedience Working Nebula was bounded by a low dry stone wall and manicured flowering shrubs. Stone cottages squatted along the main street, sporting old-fashioned chimneys and sweet herb gardens. If television's anything to go by, said Jamie, we're definitely going to be murdered. This town is quaint and murdery. Jamie had booked out a cottage bed and breakfast for himself, and, it became clear as they arrived, a number of service dog training friends. The key was in a lockbox, so it wasn't necessary for the host to meet them, but she did so nonetheless, taking them on a tour of all the rooms, cupboards, equipment, and outdoor areas that was much more thorough than the one they'd had at Big Lizzie. I live next door, she told them, so let me know if you need anything, and feel free to come round if you like. It's book club tonight, so my place will be buzzing. I'd love you to join in. She gave them a look so intense it almost seemed to imply that book club was compulsory. And Kasey found her mind jumping back to Jamie's comment about the town being murdery. I'm not really a book club person, she said tentatively. Oh, it doesn't matter, replied the host, almost snappily. It's not a very bookish book club. You'll see what I mean when it starts. So that seemed to be settled. They escaped to the pub for a schnitzel, fed all the dogs, and were subsequently fetched for book club by their host, whose name, confusingly, was Sandy. Kasey soon understood what Sandy had meant when she said it wasn't a very bookish book club. The event seemed to be more like a thinly veiled singles night, where attendees briefly mentioned books they'd been reading and then quickly moved on to chatting one-on-one with persons of interest whilst sipping wine and brandy. This meant that it was soon awkward to be chatting in a small, not-from-round-here group by the snack table, and Kasey made excuses about the long drive and ushered the others home after the first drink. In the morning, Sandy, the host, not the dog, appeared at the door bright and early with a tray of pastries and juice, alarming Kasey, who, given that she had scored one of the sofa beds and could not do much in the way of unpacking, was making do with what had been in the top of her bag, and thus was caught wearing an evening dress over track pants. Our local dog obedience club will practice this morning before the convention opens, Sandy announced. If you'd like to bring your dogs down to the green, they'd be very welcome. She said it with an expression that once again suggested the activity was not actually optional. Oh, I'm not actually a dog person, Kasey began. I was thinking I might go and explore the local area. Don't be silly, Jamie interjected. with a significant, scared glance at Sandy. "You've been getting along great with the dogs, and I could use an extra pair of hands." So it was settled, and no sooner had everyone scoffed pastries than Sandy was hustling them off to the town green, dogs in tow. "Why don't you take Spanner?" Jamie suggested, proffering the leash to Kasey. "He seems to have taken a liking to you." Kasey looked at Spanner. "You'd better not embarrass me, dog," she told him. Once the obedience session began, however, Kasey wondered what all the fuss was about. The dog owners just told their dogs to heel and proceeded to walk them in a circle, one following the other. Occasionally, they would stop, and the dogs were supposed to sit. Spanner mostly did sit, but he did so in the way that teenage boys sit on classroom chairs, lounging a bit, not quite facing the front. Kasey didn't care. As long as Spanner wasn't towing her off the field, tying her up with the lead, or stopping to poo in the middle of the circle, she considered herself to have got out of this unscathed. As they walked, Kasey noticed that many of the local dog owners kept glancing off to one side as they passed a particular edge of the green. After a few passes, she was certain that this behaviour wasn't coincidental. The woman walking behind Kasey also looked to the right, just as Kasey turned around to see if she would do so, and smiled when she caught Kasey watching. "We're spying on the mare," she said with a conspiratorial wink. "From this spot, you can see right in the upstairs window." Kasey smiled and continued walking. No wonder the obedience routine was simple. Spanner mostly did the right thing for the full 40 minutes. Jamie's surprise was obvious. And then they were walking back up the main street, as various official-looking people appeared and began setting out a range of equipment on the green and bustling in and out of an out-of-place, modern-looking building that lay on the far side. "You'll have time before the convention opens if you want to explore the local area," Sandy announced. "Have you been to see Big Tess?" The outsiders exchanged a glance. Not yet," answered Kasey, wondering when Sandy imagined they would have had time. "Is Big Tess anything like Big Lizzie?" Sandy looked disappointed. "Oh, you've been to Big Lizzie then," she said sulkily. "Big Tess is about a third of the size, if I'm honest. But otherwise similar, yes." "So a tractor," Kasey confirmed. "Yes," replied Sandy glumly. Jamie gave Kasey a look of wild-eyed concern that meant she should stop upsetting the host, for fear that tractor jealousy might be a motive for murder. "I've got to go and make sandwiches and scones for the lunch stall," Sandy told them, "plus my cake for the Pie and Cake Baking Society tonight. You're welcome to pop round when you're done at the Down if you like." Jamie looked a bit exhausted at this idea. But when Kasey began to say, "Oh, I don't really bake," he still gave her a look of horror, lest Sandy be offended. Kasey hadn't intended to spend any time at the Down herself, but the green looked as though it was prepared for a country fair, and she feared if she tried to go anywhere else, Sandy might spot her and insist on taking her along to some other club or society, none of which, Kasey was now realizing, really had much to do with what their descriptions implied. She helped Jamie walk Spanner, Sandy, the dog, not the host, Sunny and Seb, down to the new town hall to sign in. The new town hall was apparently what the out-of-place new bit of architecture on the other side of the green was. Upon registering, the visitors were given ID cards on lanyards, which opened those doors that they and the dogs were allowed to pass through. This included the toilets, which made Kasey jump out of her skin by announcing in a loud mechanical voice, "Toilet door unlocked," when she passed by wearing the lanyard. "Only official trainers can take the dogs into the workshops, I'm afraid," Jamie told Kasey, after they'd got their bearings. "I have to take this lot into the gymnasium hall at 10 a.m. That's all right, Kasey replied hurriedly. I'm really not a dog person. I think I'll go and watch the displays on the green. The sniffer dogs are catching fake criminals soon, according to this timetable. She waved the pamphlet. Spanner stayed close at Jamie's heel and glanced sidelong at his pack as they moved through the strange space. They'd been here 5 minutes, and already he'd seen 5 cops, 3 dogs from immigration control, and 1 cocky-looking spaniel in a special green coat who was definitely on the superhero squad. It was all quite daunting. The nurse and counsellor and nanny dogs in their red coats were everywhere, and Spanner was beginning to feel sheepish that none of his pack had yet earned a coat of any kind. Perhaps that was what they were here to do, he thought, watching a nurse dog with an elderly human in tow navigate their charge through the automated toilet doors. Somehow, Spanner found it hard to imagine wearing the coat. These dogs were also focused on their jobs. None of them seemed to want to laugh at the humans for being so strange and furless and caring about so many dumb things like he did. 2 soldiers in camouflage coats were guarding a box in the middle of the floor without their humans even being near them. Spanner bumped into Seb on purpose and knocked the human Jamie nearer to a little stand full of treats. Jamie probably wanted something from the stand too, right? So it was totally in his best interest to veer that way, wasn't it? Out on the green, Kasey was eating fairy floss and composing a post for Instagram while the sniffer dogs and their trainers assembled on one side of the field and a row of fake travellers with bags and suitcases lined up on the other. What should her caption be? A weekend out of my comfort zone came to mind, but she hadn't taken many photos of the trip in general or of the book club at this morning's dog obedience session. Perhaps she really should try to bake something for tonight, just to fill out her photo library. On my whistle, these dogs will race to be first to identify which of the travellers has something hidden in their bag isn't supposed to be there, announced a commentator over a megaphone. The toilet door is unlocked, declared the automated voice from inside. Kasey smirked. She'd obviously picked the best spot on the green for hearing everything clearly. A few people near her twisted around in disbelief as though demanding that somebody turn down the volume. The first dog to locate the hidden item and their trainer will be awarded the Big Test Trophy, as well as a 2-year supply of our sponsor's dog food, Scientist Choice, the commentator continued. We salute all of these dogs and their trainers for their valuable work keeping our airports safe and for giving up their time to be part of today's display. Everybody ready? On your marks, get set. The dramatically loud sound of a flushing toilet from inside the new town hall all but drowned out the whistle, but the sniffer dog's ears were tuned to its frequency, even if their trainers weren't, and despite herself, Kasey leaned forward to watch closely as they ran forward to inspect the actors' bags. As the show was finishing, Kasey felt a nudge under her arm, and the Labrador she now recognized as Spanner forced his way between her ribs and her elbow so that her arm was around him. Kasey looked at him in surprise, laughed, and took a selfie of the 2 of them together. She captioned her post, "Making friends outside my comfort zone." Jamie came running after Spanner, who Kasey now realized was dragging his leash behind him, holding the leads of Seb, Sunny, and Sandy. Something was different about the other 3 dogs, Kasey thought. After a moment, she realized that they were wearing bright new coats and harnesses. She looked at Spanner. No coat there. She looked at Jamie. Jamie sat down on the grass, and the 3 harness dogs promptly lay down in a neat line beside him. Spanner failed his assessment, Jamie exclaimed glumly. He can try again, but the others will have to move on with their training without him. Oh. Kasey patted Spanner's ears, feeling bad. Was it because he'd done this morning's obedience session with an inexperienced human? I didn't realize they were getting assessed. Jamie snorted. Neither did they. Kasey looked back at Spanner. Will you keep trying to train him? She asked. Well, Jamie gave Spanner a disappointed half smile. I could, but it would make more sense to see the others through the next phase. Dogs who don't take to guiding well enough to pass their first assessment rarely pass the second time either. It's normally recommended to have them adopted out as pets, but I feel bad sending Spanner away from the others. There was a pregnant pause. Eventually, Kasey sighed. Could he get along with a cat? Back at Kasey's house 2 days later, Lolly stood on the kitchen table, hair on end, expression furious. Spanner sat on the floor, tail wagging, and barked at Lolly. Kasey looked from one to the other. I'm sorry, Lolly, she told the cat. I know I promised not to be won over by any dogs. This isn't the relationship I intended to cultivate. She looked at Spanner. But sometimes it's good to get outside your comfort zone and try being friends with those you wouldn't normally expect to get along with. Then she gave Spanner a wink. And the rest of your pack can visit any time. She said it in a tone that suggested the visits might be compulsory. Then she looked out of her window to where Joan from next door was giving a young man a basket of apple turnovers. I'm not a baking person, Kasey remarked to her cat Lolly and her dog Spanner. But that guy who keeps coming to get baked goods from Joan seems very sweet.
Oh, so good. I already wanted to adopt a dog. This is just making it worse.
Yeah. No, that's when we had Shamrock, he was just a beautifully behaved dog, and he took to being trained at home, you know, inexpertly, and he'd do all the things basically. But in any case, we took him, or Sarah took him to Dog Obedience. I'd go along and watch. And Shamrock was a bit of a model, wasn't he? Kind of streaked through his ribbons and got all his things in with. He was going to be one of those doggies that could, you know, run up seesaws and fully the other side and jump through hoops and kind of thing. But not all the dogs were like that, were they, Sarah?
And the thing about the sitting, like, not neatly was something that he did. It took him, he always did the right thing, but he just did it in like a sloppy way. Like,
I just want to know what the mayor was doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was all getting a bit long at that point, so I opted not to come up with what was happening with the mayor. I'll write the backstory at some point. I'll flesh it out.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like when we've all forgotten about the mayor, you have to reintroduce the mayor.
The mayor of whatever it's called.
Tot something. I can't remember now. Yes.
So there'll be an actual murder mystery story in that town.
Not necessarily. Maybe a Snoopy on another story. What you see through windows, or what you imagine you might see, and then you're entirely wrong.
That would be fun.
Yeah, I think that would be if they're all completely wrong, like they've got an idea what they think what they're observing, and it's not what it is at all. Have we got any requests for next time's topics?
I'd like some more dog stories.
More dog stories.
Yeah, I like that.
You liked the dogs, yeah. All right.
Has there ever been a request for pen pals?
No. And that would be really fun.
Yeah, pen pals.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't ever had pen pals in the story before.
Or come to that role playing pals that you meet eventually.
It's all electronic these days.
No, I have a pen pal.
A physical pen, you send the letters in the mail? Yeah.
In fact, I don't even send them in the mail. I deliver them to the general store, and then I pick them up from the general store.
Oh.
Oh,
So
really?
does that mean
Mhm.
you have a pen pal you don't actually know the
I've
address
met
of?
the person. Yes, I don't know their address.
So
Yeah.
you just like the general
So-
store acts as like a go-between and
Yeah.
gives.
That's a perfect little town
Oh,
story.
wow.
It's a very small town. Yeah.
It is a small town story. That seems
Mhm.
like something that would, be established in little country
Yeah.
regional places.
Sarah, you kind of had a fear of heights suggested there. So those kind of fears we have would be interesting too.
Hmm.
Ooh.
In some, like I would be worried by an edge, no rail
Yeah.
to suggest, don't go further.
Yeah.
I can climb, but to look over an edge is the odd temptation indeed.
Get
I don't know
Is
what's
the
going
cat?
on, but
I
we
think the
can
cat's
hear
interfering
lots
with
of
dinner
clattering
preparation.
in the kitchen.
Yeah.
She's trying to climb on the bench.
She's trying
I'm
to
trying to get her food ready.
She's trying to have dinner.
Making
Another
your life
request.
difficult.
Oh, talking about snooping at the mirror in the window. There's another thing. You can get a film on your windows so you can see out, but people can't see in.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But
Make it a one-way window.
if the sun's shining into the window and inside is lighter than outside, you can actually see.
If it's lighter inside than
If it's
inside.
lighter inside than outside, you can actually see inside.
Oh, so it
So
doesn't
someone
always
might
work.
think that it's working, but
Yeah.
actually everyone can see them just sitting in front of their window.
So
Yeah.
Margaret, are you suggesting like thinking you can't be seen from the outside?
Yeah, so you get a
When
film
you
put
actually
on.
can.
Yeah.
So what might you be doing?
Yeah, you can
Well,
get
watching everyone probably. You're
Yeah.
probably sitting there watching everybody thinking,
Thinking
ha
they
ha,
can't
they
see
can't
you
see
watching
me.
them. Yeah.
You could extend that too, like into any kind of thinking you're being really subtle and
Mm.
sneaky, like thinking no one's noticing you doing something, but actually it's really obvious.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I had that when in the house I was growing up with, there used to be a big hedge. It started to die a bit, but they couldn't be bothered continuing to trim it. So my parents took it out. My room was in the front, but upstairs. And so I was so used to just doing whatever in the room, changing in front of the window, it didn't matter. Until one day I was standing at the window and a friend walked up the street and looked up and waved at me. And I was like, and I realized, I'm like, oh, people can see.
No.
All right, so we want some more dogs, some pen pals, and possibly the concept of the kind of snooping and or thinking you're sneaky and not really being sneaky. Our next story will be
And then,
the
yeah,
8th of
finding out
May.
embarrassing things.
Yeah.
Finding out embarrassing things.
Passwords.
Passwords, okay.
Chocolate frogs.
All right.
I had a chocolate frog at the end of my walk today. The chocolate frog.
You really needed a chocolate frog by then.
Frogs.
Haze.
Yeah, very.
Oh,
Yeah. Chocolate frogs and passwords.
Password.
The chocolate thing into Easter rabbits versus
Bilbies.
Bilbies.
Yes, the eternal battle.
And I've also put Mother's Day because the next story is
Yes.
the 8th of May, so it's the day before Mother's Day. So
So
we do a Mother's Day story.
Before I go, I should show you all a friend that I have in my house at the moment. Hang on.
Oh,
hang
have you
on.
got a different friend?
I've got a different friend. Yeah,
Okay.
that I have. Oh, sorry. Hang on. This is the friend.
This a uni friend?
Well,
Butterfly.
Oh.
so I've been trying to rear some butterflies because there's lots of monarch caterpillars in the garden at the moment. So I've been experimenting with that so that I can see them do their whole thing. But this friend, unfortunately, they went into the pupa a bit early, I think, and they came out very small, and their wings are really bendy and not right, so they can't actually fly. So they're just living in my house, eating sugar water for the rest of their life, which is, not so bad, I guess, but
can they have plants brought to them just to be interested in them?
yes, exactly. Yes, I just don't have a whole lot of plants in my garden that I am sure they want to eat, but I'm trying to give them a mixture of some plants and some sugar water.
Yeah,
and that's going okay.
Oh, David.
Great,
Jess,
will do.
Let's see you for next story on the 8th of May.
Awesome.
Beautiful.
Thanks for joining.
Bye.
Picnic
See
event.
you next
See
time.
ya.
Bye-bye.